What happens when an undercover CEO steps into his own publishing house, only to find it ruled by fear and corruption? Welcome back, amazing viewers. Today's story is about leadership, accountability, and the power of standing up for what's right. When Oliver Grant disguises himself as an assistant editor, he uncovers a toxic workplace where employees are silenced, hard work is stolen, and fear runs the office. But he's not about to let that continue. Stay with us as we dive into this incredible journey of justice, exposure, and transformation. You won't want to miss what happens next. Oliver Grant had spent years building Inkspire Publishing into one of the most respected publishing houses in the industry. What started as a small, independent firm had grown into a thriving company known for nurturing new writers, producing bestsellers, and fostering a creative, supportive work environment. Oliver had always believed that a company's success depended on the well-being of its employees, which is why he had worked hard to hire passionate editors, fair managers, and a leadership team that valued integrity. But lately, something has changed. Over the past 6 months, he had noticed troubling patterns: an increase in employee resignations, declining productivity, and a rise in author complaints about slow editorial processes. At first, Oliver dismissed it as the growing pains of a successful company, but then whispers began circulating, employees feeling undervalued, editors being overworked, and a toxic culture spreading through some of their regional offices. He raised his concerns with his senior managers, but their polished reports and reassurances never explained the worsening morale. What concerned him the most was the feedback from anonymous employee surveys. Several responses hinted at bullying, credit theft, and fear of speaking up. One comment in particular caught his attention. This company used to be a dream to work for, but now it's all about power plays. If you're not in the right circle, your work gets stolen, your voice gets ignored, and your effort is never recognized. Oliver couldn't ignore the signs anymore. Something was happening in his company, and if he wanted to get to the truth, he needed to see it for himself, without anyone knowing who he really was. Unlike a corporate office where CEOs were expected to remain distant, a publishing house thrived on creativity and collaboration. If toxic leadership had taken root, it could destroy everything he had built. That's when he decided to go undercover. Disguising himself as a junior editor, he would step into the world of his employees, experience their struggles firsthand, and expose the truth before it was too late. With a simple alias, a change of clothes, and the right cover story, Oliver was about to become an outsider in his own company, a decision that would change everything. Dressed in casual slacks, a button-down shirt, and thick-rimmed glasses, Oliver Grant walked into the regional office of Inkspire Publishing, not as the CEO, but as Ethan Clark, a newly hired assistant editor. The disguise wasn't elaborate, but it didn't need to be. Most of the employees in this branch had never met him in person, and without his usual polished suit and commanding presence, he blended in easily. No one looked twice at him, which was exactly what he needed. From the moment he stepped inside, he felt it. The tension in the air, the hurried movements of employees avoiding eye contact, the mechanical way people greeted each other. The energy was different from the buzzing creativity he was used to in his main office. Instead of excitement and collaboration, there was caution and exhaustion. A receptionist directed him to his assigned supervisor, Harrison Cole, the senior editor in charge of this branch. Oliver had heard his name before, but only in passing. As Oliver approached, Harrison barely glanced up from his laptop, his expression one of mild disinterest. "Ethan, right?" he said, voice clipped. "Editing experience?" "Yes," Oliver responded. "I've worked with manuscripts, developmental edits, and—" "Great," Harrison interrupted, already looking back at his screen. "You'll be assisting Sophia with whatever she needs. Just don't slow her down." "Sophia!" Oliver turned to see a young woman in her late 20s, sitting at a cluttered desk, typing furiously on her laptop. She looked up briefly, her eyes flashing with something, fatigue, maybe even hesitation, before forcing a polite smile. "Hi, I'm Sophia," she said, extending a hand. Oliver shook it, noting how she seemed wary, as if unsure whether to trust him. Harrison exhaled sharply. "Enough chit-chat. Sophia, get him started on backlog edits. And Ethan," he looked at Oliver with an uninterested gaze, "don't mess up. I don't have time for babysitting." Oliver simply nodded. But inside, he was already taking notes. As he settled into his workspace, he couldn't help but observe his surroundings. Employees worked in stiff silence, their shoulders tense whenever Harrison passed by. Some avoided his gaze entirely. Sophia kept her head down, typing away as if she was afraid to fall behind. It didn't take long for Oliver to realize this wasn't just an overworked office. This was a workplace ruled by fear. And now he was in the perfect position to find out just how deep the problem went. It didn't take long for Oliver to realize that something was very wrong in the office. The way employees worked wasn't driven by creativity or passion. It was driven by fear. Conversations were kept to a minimum, and when they did happen, they whispered, cautious, as if everyone was afraid of being overheard. Every time Harrison Cole, the senior editor, walked past, the air in the room seemed to tighten. Employees immediately straightened in their chairs, lowered their eyes, and typed a little faster. Oliver had worked in publishing for years, but he had never seen a team so visibly on edge. Sophia, the editor he was assigned to assist, was clearly one of Harrison's primary targets. Oliver watched as she worked relentlessly, barely taking breaks, even skipping lunch to meet deadlines. Despite her obvious dedication, it didn't seem to be enough for Harrison. The first time Oliver saw it happen, he was stunned. Sophia had just finalized an editorial report for a high-profile author when Harrison swooped in, took the document from her hands, and skimmed it lazily. "This is sloppy," he muttered, despite the fact that the formatting and edits were impeccable. Sophia flinched. "I followed the guidelines you—" "Then do better," Harrison cut her off, tossing the pages onto her desk as if they were garbage. "If you can't keep up, maybe you shouldn't be here at all." Oliver felt his jaw clench, but he forced himself to stay quiet. He wasn't just here to witness, he needed to understand the full extent of the toxicity before taking action. The pattern continued throughout the day. Whenever Sophia completed a task, Harrison would find a way to discredit it. Whenever an employee asked a question, he dismissed them or made a sarcastic remark that left them embarrassed. Meetings were no better. Harrison controlled every conversation, shutting down new ideas, belittling junior editors, and always making sure he took credit for any successful projects. Even worse, no one dared to speak up. Oliver could tell that this wasn't just a case of a difficult boss, it was systematic intimidation. Employees had learned that the safest thing to do was stay quiet and endure it. Oliver exhaled slowly, his grip tightening around his pen. This wasn't leadership, it was control through fear. And if no one had stopped Harrison before, it meant his power had gone unchecked for far too long. Oliver knew one thing for sure. This office didn't need minor improvements. It needed a complete overhaul. Over the next several days, Oliver carefully documented everything he saw. It wasn't just Harrison's demeaning attitude or his habit of taking credit for other people's work. It was the suffocating work culture he had created. Employees were terrified of making mistakes, knowing that even minor slip-ups could result in public humiliation or private intimidation. Oliver needed more than just observations. He needed undeniable proof. He started by talking to Sophia, earning her trust little by little. At first, she was hesitant to open up. "I don't want to complain," she muttered one afternoon, her eyes flicking toward the door, as if afraid Harrison might overhear. "It's just the way things are here." "But it doesn't have to be," Oliver pressed gently. "If you could change one thing about this place, what would it be?" Sophia hesitated before sighing. "I'd want people to feel like their work matters. Right now, no one gets recognized unless Harrison takes credit for it. And if you question him, he makes sure you regret it." That was the opening Oliver needed. Has anyone ever reported him? A bitter smile crossed Sophia's face. People have tried, but complaints go missing, emails don't get answered, and somehow the people who do speak up end up getting performance warnings until they quit. That revelation hit Oliver hard. If complaints had been buried, it meant that Harrison wasn't just a bad manager, he was actively silencing anyone who challenged him. Oliver dug deeper, reviewing incident reports and employee evaluations. He found a disturbing pattern. Talented editors like Sophia had been given unfair warnings, while Harrison's name never appeared on any official complaints. It was as if upper management had turned a blind eye, or had been manipulated into believing he was the one holding everything together. The final piece of the puzzle came when Oliver reviewed old company emails and security footage. He found instances where Harrison had dismissed employees in meetings, deleted critical feedback, and even altered documents to make it look like his work instead of his team's. The evidence was piling up, and it was damning. Oliver felt a slow, simmering anger build within him. This wasn't just a case of an overbearing boss. This was systemic abuse of power. He had everything he needed. Now, he just had to wait for the perfect moment to strike, and that moment was coming sooner than Harrison could have ever anticipated. Oliver had already seen enough abuse to know that Harrison needed to go, but what happened next sealed his fate. It was a Thursday afternoon, and the editorial team was gathered in the conference room for a meeting with a high-profile author whose latest manuscript was in the final stages of editing. This should have been a moment for collaboration and constructive feedback, but instead, it turned into a public humiliation for Sophia. As the team settled in, Harrison stood at the head of the table, flipping through a printed copy of the manuscript. "I've personally gone through the latest edits," he announced, his tone filled with self-importance, "and I've made significant improvements to tighten the narrative and refine the pacing." Oliver watched as Sophie stiffened slightly in her chair, her hands curling into fists in her lap. He already knew the truth. She had spent weeks perfecting that manuscript, working long nights to ensure it was polished. Yet here was Harrison, blatantly taking credit for her work. The author, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, flipped through the document. "This is excellent," she said, nodding. "The edits really improved the clarity." Then she turned to Sophia. "You must have put in a lot of effort. I appreciate it." Sophia opened her mouth, surprised that someone had recognized her contribution, but before she could speak, Harrison cut in with a sharp laugh. "Oh, don't be mistaken," he said, shaking his head. "Sophia just assists. I handled the bulk of the editing myself." He shot Sophia a sideways glance, his smile mocking. "She's still learning." Silence fell over the room. Sophia's face turned red with embarrassment, and Oliver could see her throat working as she swallowed back emotion. The other editors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke up. It was clear that this wasn't the first time Harrison had publicly humiliated a team member. Oliver felt something snap inside him. Enough was enough. Leaning forward, he said casually, "That's funny, because I've been working closely with Sophia, and from what I've seen, she's the one who did all the heavy lifting on this project." Harrison's face darkened. "Excuse me?" Oliver held his gaze, his voice calm but firm. "Would you like to explain exactly which edits you made, Harrison? Because from the revision logs I checked, every major change came from Sophia." The tension in the room was suffocating. Harrison's jaw tightened, and for the first time, he looked rattled. Oliver knew this was the moment, the beginning of the end for Harrison's reign of intimidation. The air in the conference room was thick with tension. Harrison sat rigid, his face dark with irritation, while Sophia kept her gaze fixed on the table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Oliver let the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone uneasy before he finally spoke again. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation," he said, his tone steady but firm. He stood up, rolling his shoulders back. Then, in one swift motion, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his business card, flipping it onto the conference table. The name gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Oliver Grant, CEO, Inkspire Publishing. Gasps rippled around the room. Sophia's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. A few editors exchanged startled glances, while Harrison went completely still. His expression flickered from disbelief to panic. Oliver folded his arms across his chest. "For the past 2 weeks, I've been working in this office as an assistant editor," he said. "I've watched, listened, and experienced firsthand what it's like to work under your leadership, Harrison." His voice hardened. "And what I found was appalling." Harrison scoffed, attempting to regain his composure. This is absurd," he blurted out. "You've been spying on us? How unprofessional." Oliver arched an eyebrow. "Unprofessional? You mean like taking credit for your employees' work, silencing complaints, and running this office like a dictatorship?" His voice was calm, but every word landed like a punch. Harrison opened his mouth, but Oliver didn't give him the chance. He turned to the rest of the room, pulling out a file of incident reports, emails, and revision logs, proving that Sophia had done all the work Harrison claimed as his own. "Everything I've seen, everything I've documented, paints a clear picture," Oliver continued. "This office has been operating under a culture of fear and intimidation, and that ends today." He turned back to Harrison, his expression unreadable. "You're fired. Effective immediately." Harrison paled. "You can't—" "I can," Oliver interrupted, his voice like steel. "And I just did." Silence hung in the air before, one by one, editors began to exchange glances of relief. For the first time, they saw justice being served. Oliver exhaled. The reign of fear was over. Now, it was time to rebuild. As Harrison stormed out of the conference room, the tension that had weighed down the office for so long seemed to dissolve in an instant. Editors exchanged stunned glances, some whispering in disbelief, others letting out quiet sighs of relief. For the first time, in what felt like forever, there was a sense that things might actually change. But Oliver knew his work wasn't done yet. Removing a toxic leader wasn't enough. It was time to recognize the people who had been holding this office together despite everything. He turned to Sophia, who still looked too shocked to process what had just happened. "Sophia," he said, his voice steady but warm, "you've been carrying the weight of this office while someone else took credit for your work. That ends today." He took a deep breath before delivering the news that he had decided long before this moment. "Effective immediately, I am promoting you to senior editor." Sophia's mouth fell open. What? She stammered, blinking rapidly as if she hadn't heard him correctly. "You earned this," Oliver assured her, "not just for your talent, but for your resilience. You deserve to be recognized for what you bring to this company." Sophia's eyes shimmered with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "I won't let you down." Oliver nodded before shifting his attention to the rest of the staff. "And that's just the beginning," he continued. "I've seen how all of you have been working under impossible conditions. That changes now." He turned to Daniel, a junior editor who had been one of the few employees brave enough to encourage Sophia when no one else would. "Daniel, you've shown real leadership in supporting your team, even when it wasn't easy. I want you to step up as assistant managing editor to help rebuild this office into the kind of place where people actually want to work." Daniel's eyes widened. "Me?" he asked, pointing at himself in disbelief. Oliver chuckled. "Yes, you." As murmurs of excitement spread across the room, Oliver laid out his plans for the company moving forward. An open-door policy for employee concerns, anonymous reporting systems, and new leadership training for all managers. "From now on, this will be a place where talent is valued, where hard work is recognized, and where no one has to suffer in silence," he declared. For the first time since he had stepped into this office, the room felt lighter, filled with hope instead of fear. Change had begun, and Oliver was going to make sure it lasted. 2 weeks later, Inkspire Publishing's regional office was almost unrecognizable. Where there had once been tension and fear, there was now collaboration and energy. Employees walked with confidence, no longer afraid to speak up or share their ideas. The air, which had once felt stifling under Harrison's control, was now filled with the hum of creativity and teamwork. Oliver returned to the office not in disguise this time, but as himself, the CEO. He observed quietly as Sophia, now senior editor, led a meeting with a team that actually listened to her. No longer shrinking under the weight of someone else's authority, she spoke with confidence, encouraging junior editors to share their thoughts and treating every contribution with respect. Daniel, now assistant managing editor, moved through the office, checking in on employees and making sure deadlines were being met, without intimidation or pressure. He had taken to his new role with ease, bringing positivity and support where there had once been silence and fear. When Oliver sat down with the team for a follow-up meeting, the change was undeniable. "So," he said, a small smile playing on his lips, "how are things feeling around here?" Sophia exchanged a look with Daniel before responding. "It's different," she admitted. Then, with a grin, she added, "in the best way possible." The rest of the team nodded in agreement, and one editor spoke up, Honestly, I didn't think things could actually change, but they did. Oliver nodded, feeling a sense of satisfaction settle in his chest. Because you all made it happen, he said. This company isn't just about publishing books, it's about the people who make it run. And I'll make sure you never feel unheard again. As the meeting wrapped up, Oliver took one last look around. The difference wasn't just in the atmosphere, it was in the people. They were no longer cogs in a broken system, but valued professionals who were finally allowed to thrive. As he walked out of the office, he knew that the hardest part wasn't the change itself. It was making sure it lasted. But with the right people now in charge, Inkspire Publishing was heading into a new era, one built on trust, respect, and real leadership. And this time, Oliver would make sure it stayed that way. The story of Oliver Grant's undercover journey teaches a powerful lesson about leadership, accountability, and workplace culture. A company's success isn't just about profits or reputation, it's about the people who make it thrive. When leaders become too distant, they risk losing sight of the real struggles employees face. By stepping into the shoes of his workers, Oliver saw firsthand the toxic culture that had taken root under poor management. One of the biggest takeaways is that bad leadership doesn't just affect productivity, it destroys morale, silences talent, and drives away great employees. Harrison's reign of fear caused brilliant editors to feel undervalued and powerless, proving that one toxic person in power can ruin an entire workplace. But more importantly, the story also highlights that change is possible when the right leaders step up, listen, and take action. Recognizing and empowering the right people is just as crucial as removing toxic leaders. Sophia and Daniel, once overlooked, became key figures in the company's transformation, proving that talent flourishes when given the right environment. Ultimately, the story reminds us that real leadership isn't about control. It's about creating a space where people feel valued, heard, and empowered to do their best work.